Okay, today we're going to study about Solomon built the temple. In other words, he built the temple. The text is like 1 Kings 5, the first 7 chapters up to verse 51. And then 2 Chronicles 1 through 4, and then up to verse 22. And then our focus is actually 1 Kings 5, verse 2, 6, 10, and then chapter 6 and verse 14. So I'm going to start with 1 Kings chapter 5 and go all the way through that and just touch on the rest. It basically all deals with the building of the temple is what it's about. And we all know for quite some time that David had in his heart he wanted to build a temple for the Lord. He wasn't satisfied that he had a nice house, temple to live in, and the Lord had just an tent. So he got in his heart, he wanted to build the Lord a temple. And the Lord told him, you can't. He wouldn't let David build the temple because he had the blood on his hands from fighting the Lord's battles. But God promised to let Solomon build the temple instead. Even though David could not build the temple, he did a lot in preparation for the temple. For the building of the temple by providing workers and the materials like hewed stone, gold, silver and bronze, iron and cedar wood. And he even drew up the plans as given to him by the Spirit of God. In other words, as the Spirit of God guided him, he was able to build the plans to make the temple. But the most important thing David did was prepare Solomon to build the temple. Solomon was to seek God with a perfect heart and a willing mind. And he said, but if thou forsake him, he will cast thee off forever. He reminded Solomon that God had chosen him to build the temple. And I just want to note, the amount of gold and silver and bronze used in the construction of the temple would be valued in the hundreds of billions of dollars today if you was to get a price on that. So that's how much it would cost in today's terms. It's hard to believe that it would be that much. And then we start with chapter 1 Kings 5, verse 1. And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants unto Solomon, for he had heard that they had anointed him king in the room of his father, for Hiram was ever a lover of David. And Hiram was also called Huram. So he was a lover of David, that meaning that he had always loved David and was one of David's allies. In other words, David could count on him to be by his side. And being a foreign king, he was not expected to show any mercy or admonition toward Solomon. But because he was a close friend of David, he was willing to reach out to the next king of Israel because of David's friendship. King Hiram sent messengers and cedar trees, carpenters, masons to build David a house, and he wanted to do the same for Solomon. And then 2 Samuel 5:11. And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David and cedar trees and carpenters and masons, and they built David a house of the stone of the wall. That's what I want to back. If you go to, let me see what it is here. 2 Samuel chapter 7 talks about how David wanted to build the temple for the Lord. If you want to study it, just read chapter 7. And also 1 Kings 5:10 says, so Hiram gave Solomon cedar trees and fir trees according to all his desire. And then Solomon sent to Hiram saying, in other words, Solomon's informing Hiram, the king of Tyre, of his intention to build a house for the name of the Lord God, essentially signifying his plan to construct the temple in Jerusalem and requesting Hiram's assistance with providing materials like cedar wood, skilled workers to complete the project. This here demonstrates Solomon's commitment to fulfilling God's promise to David about building a temple dedicated to God's name. In other words, Solomon, that was his focus was building that temple for God. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 2 and verse 3, and Solomon sent to Hiram the king of Tyre, saying, as thou didst deal with David my father, and didst send him cedars to build an house to dwell therein, even so deal with me. In other words, he's asking Hiram to deal with him although he did with his father, to do the same for him. Verse 3, thou knowest how that David my father could not build an house unto the name of the Lord his God, for wars which were about him on every side, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. So David couldn't build a house because of all the wars that he was fighting for the Lord. The temple was to be built for the glory of the Lord and for his worship. The Lord did not want his house to be known for bloodshed. That's why he wouldn't let David build it, because he didn't want it to be known for the bloodshed. And anyway, besides that, David did not have the time to build the temple because he was busy fighting the Lord's battles. So he didn't have time anyway, because he was busy in the first place. Solomon didn't have an easy task. It's easy to say, I'm going to build the temple. It's easy to gather the materials. In other words, it's not a problem to gather all the materials you need, but when you start to do the work, it's another thing. It took Solomon 7 years to build the temple. That's a long time. And verse 4, but now the Lord my God hath given me rest on every side, so that there is neither adversaries nor evil occurrence. Because of what David did, Solomon he didn't have to worry about people coming in trying to take over him or fighting his battles. He could dedicate all his time to building the temple. Because of David's fighting the Lord's battle, Solomon could focus his time on building the temple. The Lord gives each one of us time and opportunity for a different task in his work. Some have time and are good at maintenance. Others can travel doing mission work. And others, the time and talent to teach a Sunday school classes. We need to be careful about not complaining about some not doing what we are doing. Not everyone has the same talent and the time to do everything. The thing that you are doing for the Lord may give an opportunity for someone else to do what God has for them to do. So that's why we need to be careful. Don't be worried about what somebody else is doing. Just focus on your job, and maybe what you're doing is going to open up an opportunity for someone else to do what they need to do for the Lord. And then 1 Chronicles 22, verse 9, behold, a son shall be born to thee, who shall be a man of rest, and that's Solomon. And I will give him rest from all his enemies around about, for his name shall be Solomon, and I will give him peace and quietness unto Israel in his days. That would be awesome, not to have to worry about wars and fighting and carrying on, to have a peaceable relationship, and not have to worry about going out and having anything bad happen. That would be nice if we had that. Verse 5, and behold, I purpose to build an house unto the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord spake unto David my father, saying, thy son whom I will set upon thy throne in thy room, he shall build an house unto my name. If Solomon had not set his heart on what the Lord commanded, it would do little good to have all the materials and instruction and encouragement that David gave to Solomon. In other words, okay, Solomon knew he was supposed to build a temple, but if he didn't really have the desire, want to do it, it doesn't do any good to have all the materials, because he's not really focused on doing that. 2 Samuel 7:12. And when the days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up my seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. And he shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. In other words, he's talking to David here, telling him that what's going to happen after he goes to be with his fathers. Solomon's going to come along and he's going to be appointed to be king, and then he's going to build the temple for the Lord. Now, verse 6. Now therefore command thou that they hew me cedar trees out of Lebanon, and my servants shall be with thy servants, and unto thee will I give hire for thy servants according to all that thou shalt appoint. For thou knowest that there is not among us any that can skill to do hew timber like unto the Sidonians. And in Tyre and Sidon were both Phasonian cities that existed long before Israel ever entered into the Promised Land. Working with lumber and building structures, their citizens had made it into an art. In other words, they knew what they were doing. They knew how to take the lumber and use it and to build a good structure with it. Solomon knew their reputation, and he wanted their help in completing the temple. In 2 Chronicles chapter 2 and verse 8, send me also cedar trees, fir trees, algum trees out of Lebanon, for I know that thy servants can skill to cut timber in Lebanon. And behold, my servant shall be with thy servants. In 2 Chronicles chapter 2 and verse 9, even to prepare me timber in abundance, for the house which I am about to build shall be wonderfully great. And behold, I will give to thy servants, the hewers that cut timber, 20,000 measures of beaten wheat and 20,000 measures of barley, 20,000 baths of wine and 20,000 baths of oil. That's a lot. And in verse 7, and it came to pass, when Hiram heard the words of Solomon, that he rejoiced greatly and said, blessed be the Lord this day, which hath given unto David a wise son over this great people. We're talking about Hiram, the king. This man was a pagan king. If the Jewish historian Josephus is correct, Hiram's father was named Abiel, which means my father is Baal. If this was true, he was raised to love Baal. The thing of it is, Hiram was pleased with Solomon's request and eager to help with his massive project. So that's quite awesome that this king, being raised in what he was to love Baal, he was willing to help this king build the temple. And verse 8, Hiram sent to Solomon, saying, I have considered the things which thou sendest to me for, and I will do all thy desires concerning timber of cedar and concerning timber of fir. In other words, Solomon asked Hiram to send skilled workers, specifically mentioning cedar and cypress wood from Lebanon, which were highly valued for their quality and beauty. This passage also indicates that Hiram readily agrees to Solomon's request, showing a positive relationship between the two kings. This partnership highlighted the importance of trade and diplomacy in the region, allowing Solomon to access materials and expertise needed to build the temple, a significant religious project for the Israelites. Verse 9, my servants shall bring them down from Lebanon unto the sea. I will convey them by the sea in floats unto the place that thou shalt appoint me, and I will cause them to be discharged there, and thou shalt receive them, and thou shalt accomplish my desire in giving food for my household. Or in other words, he was going to do what Solomon needed and take them and deliver them. All Solomon had to do was to hold up his end of the bargain. Solomon had sent messengers to Hiram, the king of Tyre, asking for assistance in building the temple, specifically requesting cedar wood from Lebanon. Hiram is greatly rejoiced by Solomon's request and readily agrees to provide the materials and the manpower needed for the temple construction. This arrangement is seen as a mutual beneficial agreement with Solomon providing food for Hiram's people in exchange for the necessary building materials. Ezra 3:7, they gave money also unto the masons and to the carpenters, and meat and drink and oil unto the Zidon, and to them of Tyre, to bring cedar trees from Lebanon to the sea of Joppa, according to the grant that they had of Cyprus, king of Persia. Verse 10, so Hiram gave Solomon cedar trees and fir trees according to all his desire. It stated Hiram completed his part. All Solomon had to do was keep his half of the bargain. Because of the mutual respect they had for one another and Solomon's fear of the Lord, I would think that would mean his love for the Lord, not that he was afraid of the Lord in that respect. Each party fulfilled their side of the agreement. Now in verse 11, Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 measures of wheat for food to his household and 20 measures of pure oil. Thus gave Solomon to Hiram year by year, every year that he did this. And Solomon gave 120,000 measures of wheat and 120,000 of oil for Hiram's servants and household every year. This was a fantastic barter system. In other words, it's a method of trading goods or services without the use of money that benefited both men greatly. Secular history declares that the relationship between Tyre and Israel lasted for quite some time. As a result, they both received the products they needed. We have to remember, God cares for his children and is able to supply every need we have. God can take care of us. All we have to do is just depend on him. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 2 and verse 10, and behold, I will give to thy servants the hewers, and the hewers are actually cutters, that cut timber, 20,000 measures of beaten wheat, 20,000 measures of barley, and 20,000 baths of wine, and 20,000 baths of oil. Now verse 12, and the Lord gave Solomon wisdom as he promised him, and there was peace between Hiram, Solomon, and they two made a league together. Of how many times this occurs, the giving of wisdom to Solomon was not just a one-time thing. God provided Solomon with wisdom as needed during his reign as the king of Israel. This wisdom that we're talking about is godly wisdom. It's not the wisdom of the world. The Hebrew word for league is often translated as covenant. This verse means Solomon and Hiram made a covenant together or peace treaty. This peace treaty was expected to be honored through the lives of both parties. Because of the lack of conflict between Tyre and Israel, this is exactly what happened. I want you to note, it's possible that many of the ungodly kings after Solomon honored this treaty. We don't know for sure, but it's possible that they even honored their treaty after Solomon had fulfilled his reign. In 1 Kings 3, verse 12, behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there is none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. So before Solomon and after Solomon, there was nobody that had the godly wisdom that Solomon did. In verse 13, and King Solomon raised a levy out of all Israel, and the levy was 30,000 men. In other words, Solomon selected these men specifically for this task, divided into 3 groups of 10,000 men each. Each group would spend 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. That way, only one group at a time was in Lebanon. And then verse 14, and he sent them to Lebanon 10,000 a month by courses. A month they were in Lebanon and 2 months at home. And Adoniram was over the levy. Adoniram was already in this position and likely had experience and knew exactly which workers would be beneficial in his service. He'd already been this, so he knew which one would do the best, give him the best results. And in 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 6, and Asher was over the thousands, the household, and Adoniram was the son of Abidah, was over the tribute, or the levy. And in verse 15, Solomon had 70,000 that bare burdens, and 80,000 hewers in the mountains. In other words, Solomon had 70,000 common laborers that bear burdens, and 80,000 hewers of cutters. And in 2 Chronicles 2:17, Solomon numbered all the strangers that were in the land of Israel, after the numbering wherewith David his father had numbered them, and they were found in 150,000 and 3,600. And in verse 18, and he set 70,000 of them to be bearers of burdens, and 80,000 to be hewers in the mountains, and 3,600 overseers to set the people at work. I think this, where it says strangers up here, I have to believe that these people maybe were knowledgeable, or they were taught. They just weren't people that you pull off the street to take and do a job. They had to have some background in what they were doing. And in verse 16, besides the chief of Solomon's officers, which were over the work, 3,300, which ruled over the people that wrought in the work. The organized labor force that Solomon assembled for that grand task of constructing the temple. This verse highlights a significant leadership aspect where Solomon efficiently managed a diverse group of workers, showcasing his ability to delegate responsibilities. Solomon had 3,300 chief officers, and each one was in charge of 45 to 55 workers each. That's quite a lot of men to be taken care of at one time. Solomon's workforce and King Hiram's workforce worked side by side to complete the temple. In 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 23, these were the chief officers that were over Solomon's work, 550 which bear rule over the people that wrought in the work. I have to believe it says 550. The rest had to be chief officers on Hiram's, the king's side. And verse 17, and the king commanded, and they brought great stones, costly stones, and huge stones to lay the foundation of the house. The stones that were used was the best quality available. In other words, they just weren't any ordinary stones. This verse describes how, at King Solomon's command, large, high-quality stones were cored and transported to be used as the foundation stones for the temple, signifying the importance of a strong and solid base for the building project, emphasizing quality, durability in the construction process, essentially laying a firm foundation for something significant. And in 1 Chronicles 22 and verse 2, David commanded to gather together the strangers that were in the land of Israel, and he set masons to hew wrought stones to build the house of God. And in verse 18, Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders did hew them and the stone quarters, so they prepared timber and stones to build a house. You have to wonder, you see that Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders, they worked together for quite some time. You have to wonder, with the two groups working side by side, they probably became close friends over time. Some of them did. You have to wonder, did the Israelites share God with them? Or did the Thessalonians ask about details and stories that God had performed for them? The Bible is really silent on these things, but you have to wonder, did they really share God with the people that they were working with, or did the people they were working with ask about God's ability and what he did for them. Now I go over to 1 Kings 6, and really the first 10 verses tells us the building of the temple begins, the size of the temple, and all pre-cut stone is put in the proper place. It talks about the lumber that is used in the building, the different porches that are built and the size of each one, and the windows and the size of the windows, and there's much more that talks about. In fact, all the way through chapter 7, it talks about the building of the temple, what was used, and so forth. 1 Kings 6:11, and the word of the Lord came to Solomon saying, in other words, he had an important message, an important promise to remind Solomon of, was the importance of obedience to God. And then in verses 12 and 13 are together. He was telling Solomon that he had to be obedient in all matters, not just some, and this included leading the children of Israel. He was focused on building the temple. You have to be careful that some other areas that you lack obedience, not being obedient because you're focused on this one thing. The Lord is more concerned with Solomon's obedience rather than the building of the temple. In other words, the Lord wants us to be obedient rather than getting involved in doing something and slacking in our obedience. And then verse 14, so Solomon built the house and finished it. It's one thing to start something and finish it. Solomon not only started the temple, but also finished the temple. He didn't allow anything to distract him in the process of what he set out to do. In other words, he was completely focused. Nothing around him. He didn't let anything around him distract him or get in his way. He was totally focused on building that temple. He wasn't worried about what was on all sides of him at that time. So that's all that I have for this series of this lesson on Solomon building the temple. I'm open for comments. Brother Hess, did you have comments that you're thinking about?
In chapter 6, verse 12, there's one thing that stood out to me.
Okay.
And as we look at the things in these Old Testament areas pertaining to what God's people are supposed to be doing and things like that, there was one stipulation as far as what's going to take place out of everything that's being done. And in verse 12 of chapter 6, it says, number 1, concerning this house which thou art building, if you will, number 1, walk in my statutes. Number 2, execute my judgments. 3, keep all my commandments. 4, walk in my commandments. Then will I perform my word with you, which I spake to David, your father. A church is no different than that.
No, that's true.
That's
the same thing for us.
God will bless our church if we, as a church, not just one or two people.
Everybody.
If membership means something to us, this is what we should be doing.
Yeah. Right.
If not, God can't bless.
Sure. I apologize. I didn't read verses 12 and 13. If I would have realized that too, that those 4 points there are very important. If we do those 4 points, then God's going to bless us. And it's like, it's a conditional. If we do a certain thing, God's going to do a certain thing, basically.
Another thing that we look at, what kind of a measuring stick did they use to figure all these things out?
Well, they call it cubits. And it's like, I don't know if they, from here to the elbow, to the tip of the finger to the elbow.
Finger to the elbow.
Yeah.
Is 1 cubit.
Yeah, that's what they used. They didn't use like a regular yardstick like what we use today. They had their own means of measuring. And then what they did, they just translated into what it would be today in actual feet. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Brother Perry, would you dismiss us this morning, please?